Way back in May of 1995, a 29-year-old truck driver named Devon Eugene Williams was living in Americus, Kansas with his wife and 3 young children. Having just moved into a brand new family home, Devon's wife would later say it was the happiest point in their marriage. But beneath the surface, something terrible festered and unfurled. Devon was described by friends as a patient and good-natured young man, but just weeks after beginning an exciting new chapter in his life, he disappeared without a trace. On Sunday, May 28th of 1995, a 48-foot, 10-ton, 18-wheeler semi-truck hurtled through Arizona's Tonto National Forest. The roar of its engine was so loud that 2 campers, named Lynn and Jack Yarrington, temporarily halted their hike to see what all the commotion was. They approached the nearest highway, then seconds later, spotted a speeding 18-wheeler recklessly careening back and forth along a stretch of road it was most certainly not suited for, and all at breakneck speed so fast it sent a shiver down the Yarrington spines. Another group of hikers, this one traveling by car, suffered a hair-raisingly close call when the same 18-wheeler drove head-on at them following a chance encounter on the highway. The hikers were able to swerve out of the truck's path, and each avoided sudden and violent deaths, but later stated that the truck's mustachioed driver had remained disturbingly expressionless despite narrowly avoiding his own complete annihilation. Later on that day, a group on their way to a picnic spotted the stationary truck, which by that point had swerved off the road and become stuck in a field. After stopping their vehicle, one of the picnic group climbed out of their car and asked the truck driver if he needed any help. The driver's reply was as chilling as it was confusing. "They made me do it," he said, as if answering a question that hadn't been asked. The Good Samaritan, a man named Charles Hall, reportedly asked the truck driver, "Who made you do what?" To which the driver replied in a panicked voice, "No, you can't help. No one can. I'll never get it out of there. I'm going to jail." When Charles heard the word jail being thrown around, he realized that he might have stumbled across something deeply sinister. He agreed to leave the truck driver alone, but later contacted the local sheriff's department, speaking to a Deputy Wells regarding the man's suspicious demeanor. Much like the campers, the deputy was confused as to why such a large vehicle would drive along unsuitable forest roads and went to investigate. Upon his arrival, he discovered the semi stuck in deep mud within a meadow not far from Forest Service Road 137 in the Buck Springs area. Once Deputy Wells looked inside the truck, he discovered the cargo within undisturbed and intact, 1,200 boxes of lettuce and strawberries with the refrigeration still running. The vehicle appeared completely abandoned and the cab had been firmly locked. Deputy Wells checked his national crime computer and learned that there were no reports submitted for either a missing truck or a missing driver. He also later stated, upon peering through the window of the truck's cab, he noted the interior was well kept and there was no indication that any foul play had taken place. Later that day, Lynn and Jack Yarrington were driving along Forest Service Road 321 when they came upon a man standing among some trees at the roadside. According to the Yarringtons, they stopped their car, only to see that the man was kneeling on the ground, staring at a tree, and appeared to be mumbling to himself. The couple said it was impossible to make out exactly what he was saying, and after Jack asked if the man needed any assistance, he replied simply, "I've got to light the grill." Moments later, Jack watched as the stranger produced a $20 bill from his shirt pocket. The stranger then picked up a rock, held the bill to the ground, and began striking it with a stone as if attempting to spark a flame. Deeply alarmed by what they were seeing, the Harringtons returned to their car, only to have the stranger scream unintelligibly before he hurled the rock in their direction. He then appeared to stumble into the Yarringtons' direction, prompting them to immediately flee the scene. Only later was the strange man confirmed to have been the truck driver, Devon Williams, and sadly, it marked the last time he was ever seen alive. When he failed to stick to his delivery schedule and confident in the belief that he'd never willingly abandon a shipment, Devon's coworkers reported him missing. Investigators began to track Devon's movements leading up to his disappearance and learned he'd left his home on May 23rd, heading west on a route that he'd taken many times before. He successfully delivered his haul to California, reloaded his truck for his trip back to the Midwest, and then had a brief conversation with his boss, Tom Wilson. Wilson later stated that everything seemed fine and that Devon wasn't acting out of the ordinary. He was punctual, seemed lucid, and gave no indications that anything was wrong. A few nights later, on the evening of Saturday, May 27th, Devon arrived in Kingman, Arizona. He would call his boss for the second and final time, ensuring him that he'd make it to Kansas City on schedule, but added an eerie addendum when he complained of insomnia. His boss reportedly asked if he'd be able to complete his journey, but Devon once again assured him that he'd be fine. Yet according to police reports, Devon never even made it out of Arizona. Arizona missing persons detective Bruce Cornish would later state that he and his team were completely flummoxed when it came to Devon's potential fate. He was neither a criminal nor a drug user and had no history of mental health problems prior to his disappearance, meaning easy explanations were hard to come by. This led many to theorize that Devon's disappearance was entirely voluntary, with some pointing to the fact that certain personal items had been removed from the truck. Nevertheless, authorities mounted a large-scale search for the missing trucker, utilizing foot patrols, search dogs, off-road vehicles, and dozens of civilian volunteers. Search teams were told to look for scraps of clothing and even bone fragments, but despite days of searching, not a single trace of Devon Williams was ever found. This also made for a chilling anomaly, as up until that point, the Scottsdale-based search and rescue team charged with recovering his remains had yet to come up short in the course of a long-term search. Devon's disappearance marked the first time that they'd failed to bring home a missing person, either dead or alive, which, to many, was as eerie as it was perplexing. 2 years later, on May 2nd of 1997, two hikers were tracing the bottom of Gila County's Mogollon Rim when they stumbled upon the remains of a human skull. Dental records would later confirm what many had first feared. The skull belonged to the missing trucker, Devon Williams. Although the skull had been damaged, a coroner determined that it was impossible to conclude if this was the result of a deliberate, violent act or the result of scavengers consuming a corpse following an otherwise accidental death. Some suggested the erratic behavior Devon displayed was the result of a diabetic episode. Others argue sleep deprivation or mental illness were to blame. Some even purport that Devon was the victim of a slow form of carbon monoxide poisoning following a leak in his truck's cabin, but to date, no such theory has been irrefutably confirmed. Devon's wife, Mary Lou Williams, still longs for a day when explanations of her husband's fate will be beyond dispute, but she also stated that with each passing year, the hope of seeing such a day slowly and painfully decreases. Mary Lou has said that back when her husband was listed as a missing person, the lack of conclusive answers caused her children terrible suffering. Yet the discovery of Devon's skull brought only a sliver of morbid closure to the family, as many questions still remained. For example, what caused Devon to stray so far from his intended route? And if his state of mind was affected, what exactly caused such a catastrophic mental break? However, some suggest that Devon was well within his right mind when he swerved his truck off the road, as prior to his abandonment, he ensured the cab was locked. Unless Devon suffered some kind of rapid mental breakdown in the space of just 2 to 3 hours, then something frightened him so badly that he did things that most would consider to be highly and unhealthily irrational. Some say fear can drive a man to madness, in which case, what was Devon Williams so deathly afraid of? And could it possibly explain why his broken skull was found just a few years later, less than a mile away from the spot where he disappeared?
Hey guys, Thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
My missing crush. What happened to your online store, Emma? I asked. Nothing much. I have set it up, but promoting it is an issue, she replied with a tired voice. But I thought you said you had enough money for that, I said again, reminding her of this. Yes, that was when I did not know how much it was going to cost. Promotional stuff is more expensive than I thought. She again looked at me with tired eyes, and that's when I got an idea. Why don't you try self-promoting? I can help you with that, I suggested. What? Will you? Really? She held my hand and asked me while looking into my eyes. That's what I just said, I said, and it made her happy. We decided to come up with a few strategies to do the self-promotion and then meet the next day at a coffee shop near my office. The next day after work, I got earlier at the coffee shop and waited for Emma to show up. About 50 minutes later, she walked to the table I was at and sat across me. She looked pretty in the green dress that she was wearing. Anyway, as we were sipping our coffees, we started to discuss just what we would be doing to self-promote this thing. I suggested we started by sending out messages to everyone we know and use social media to promote the store, since social media could attract most of the customers into visiting Emma's website. Facebook was my primary suggestion because it is the biggest platform that has the largest audience among other social media platforms. I had to set up a page and start promoting the store. I told her not to worry too much about it, for I would take care of setting up the pages and everything that they needed. After finishing up the discussion and the coffee, I asked to drop her home, and she agreed to. For those of you who are wondering about me, my name is Eden Miller. Emma and I have been childhood friends, and I've always had a crush on her. But she only saw me as a friend and nothing more. I did not want to ruin our relationship, so I never told her how I felt. We graduated from the same high school, and after that, Emma got into fashion design in college, while I chose business management. During the second year of college, she got into her first relationship, which made me feel devastated, but to my relief, they broke up within a few months. Emma had always been working part-time jobs even when we were in high school and saving up money, and after graduating from college, she decided to open up her online clothing store. Even though I told her that I would help her financially if she needed it, she never asked for my help. So it was finally my chance to prove myself to her. After dropping Emma off at her house, I went to my apartment, and despite my busy schedule, I started working on the Facebook page for her online store. I asked all my friends to spread the word about the store, and they were pretty nice to do that. After setting up the page, I started uploading frequent posts regarding the online store, products, and things of the sort. A week went by, and the response was slow, but I was positive that it would increase over time. I guess Emma was too eager for it to get successful. She called me one day and told me that as she was uploading some stories related to her store, she got a message on Facebook from a stranger. The stranger told Emma that he could help the store become a success in no time and asked her to meet somewhere for further discussion. I told her that there are many such scams on Facebook, so be careful, and despite my asking her to reveal the address where he asked to meet her, she did not tell me about it. Emma, who used to tell me every little detail of whatever she was up to, was not telling me something as important as this. It made me feel anxious for some reason. I felt that something was definitely off about this. I tried contacting her, but she turned her phone off, which made me even more worried. As time was passing, I started feeling this tightness in my chest because her number was still off. I drove to her house and found it locked. I started pacing back and forth in front of her house, waiting for her. Hours passed, and the darkness of the night had started to spread, but there was still no sign of her. I sat in front of her house all night long and was so worried that I started to cry because her phone was still off and I had no idea where she was. The next morning, the very first thing I did was file a missing person report for her. And after that, I asked one of my friends who was a hacker to hack Emma's Facebook, ID, and track the person account who had sent the message. He called me back 4 hours later and informed me that the account Emma was talking to was a fake one. I got even more worried and started to panic. Police began the search and investigation, but they had no clues to find Emma. It was like the man did not leave any traces behind to follow. 2 more days passed, and there was still no sign of her. And that was when my hacker friend called and informed me that there has been a new post made by Emma on her Facebook account. He sent me the picture, and it was Emma wearing a blue dress and smiling, which I could tell was forced because after crushing on her for so long, I could tell when she would be smiling truly or when she gave us a fake smile. After looking at this picture very carefully and closely, it seemed that she had bruises on her neck, which were covered up with makeup, and her eyes looked puffy as well. I zoomed in on the picture and tried to recognize the surrounding. It seemed like a nightclub in Western Town. I updated the police about the details and headed to the nightclub. The officers reached there before me and asked about the girl in the picture. The employees denied seeing her. As we were asking around, one of the employees admitted to seeing her with a man. They requested CCTV footage, and in the footage, it could be seen that a man came in with her, but they left just after taking a picture of her. Emma looked like she was getting forced into doing all that, and the way she was walking seemed weird. The guy looked somewhat familiar to me, I just couldn't quite put my finger on it. As I tried remembering the guy, something in my mind clicked, and I remember that Emma showed me a picture of this guy when she was in college. He was her ex-boyfriend, Derek. I guess I never told you why Emma broke up with him. It was because he was manipulating her. He was aggressive, and he started to raise hands on her while making up his assumptions. Anyway, I told officers about the guy, and they immediately went and started tracking his whereabouts. He was soon arrested in his house, and the interrogation started. He tried to act as if he did not know anything about it, and then he told the officers that he hadn't even seen Emma for years. But when they told him that they know that he had kidnapped and hidden her somewhere against her will, he finally opened his mouth. Emma was found locked in one of the warehouses that was owned by him, and she was in a terrible state. He used to beat her, rape her, and do horrible things to her, which made her traumatized. She was sent to the hospital for treatment and recovery, while Derek was locked up in prison, and trials were held against them after that. I don't know how she managed to endure all these tortures and sufferings, but now that she was found, I promised myself that I would never let anything happen to her again.
I was scrolling through my phone when I came across an article, The Mysterious Disappearance of the Manic Street Preacher Star. I opened the article to read it. It said Ricky Edwards vanished on the 1st of February 1995 and was presumed to have committed suicide. I read the article and got curious, so I Googled his name, and then I found out about his mysterious disappearance. Ricky Edwards was a songwriter, musician, and rhythm guitarist of the alternative rock band Manic Street Preachers. He joined the band in 1989 and became the 4th member and spokesman. He had a younger sister, Rachel, and the two of them were very close. His interests were in music and literature. He often used to refer to writers and poets during interviews. His love for poetry reflected through his songwritings. Edward was suffering from severe depression and often talked about it in his interviews. He was often implementing self-harm and used to cut himself and stuff cigarettes on his arms. He said, "When I cut myself, I feel so much better. All the things that might have been annoying me suddenly seem so trivial because I'm concentrating on the pain. I'm not a person who can scream and shout, so this is my only outlet." He also had insomnia and a drinking problem. He often used to drink so that he could sleep. Edward was the first person to talk about his depression publicly and inspired his fans to do so. His fans started to follow Edwards and started to harm themselves like him, copying him, etc. Caitlin Moran has also stationed in the Times, Edwards became a cause among depressives, alcoholics, anorexics, and self-mutilators because he was the first person in the public's eyes to talk openly about these subjects, not with swagger, bravado, and a subtext of "look how tortured and cool I am," but with humility, sense, and often bleak humor. On the 15th of May 1991, when he was asked a question by NME journalist Steve Lamont about how serious he was for his art, he carved the words "for real" into his forearm with a razor blade as his response. On the 1st of February 1995, Edwards, along with Bradfield, a fellow band member, was supposed to fly to the United States for a promotional tour of the Star Preacher's album, The Holy Bible, which was released in 1994. In the morning of the 1st of February 1995, he was reported missing by his family and the search began. Edward took his wallet, car keys, and some Prozac and his passport and checked out of the hotel at 7 a.m., leaving his packed suitcase behind. After he drove to his friend's place in Cardiff, he left his passport, Prozac, and the Servant Bridge tool both received. In the following couple of weeks, he was reported to be spotted by a fan in the Newport passport office and at Newport bus station who was unaware that Edwards was missing. The night before his disappearance, he gave a book, the novel with cocaine, to a friend, telling her to read the introduction, which followed the details of the author staying in a mental asylum. Investigation continued, and on the 7th of February, a driver reported that he supposedly picked up Edwards from the King's Hotel and drove him around the valleys. Reportedly, the passenger had Cockney accent, which occasionally slipped into Welsh one. He got out at the Severn View service station near Oss, South Gloucestershire. Edwards Volks Cavalier received a parking ticket on the 14th of February at the Severn View service station, but it was reported abandoned on the 17th of February. Police discovered the car's battery to be dead, along with the photos of his families that were taken before his disappearance. It looked like someone had lived in the car. It was supposed that Edward had jumped out from the Severn Bridge, a known suicide site, but many of his known people claimed that he was not the type to commit suicide. Edwards himself said in 1994, "In terms of S-word, that does not enter my mind, and it never has been done in terms of attempts, but I am stronger than that. I might be a weak person, but I can take pain." Reportedly, Edwards was spotted in Goa, India, and on the islands of Fuerteventura and Lanzarote. Apart from those, there have been other alleged sightings of Edwards as well. The investigation continued, but apart from his reported sightings, there were no other evidence to the police. The investigation received a heavy criticism, was also quoted by Simpson Price, far from satisfactory. He said that police should have taken Edwards' mental state into account when they are prioritizing his disappearance. Edwards' family was given the option to declare him legally dead from 2022, but they did not for many years. His status was missing persons until the 23rd of November 2008, when he was announced presumed dead. There were many books that were written based on Edwards' disappearance, such as Rob Jonovich's book, A Version of Reason, The Search for Richey Edwards and the Manic Street Preachers. It was published in 2009. A novel was written by Ben Myers with the name of Richard, a Novel, which was published on the 1st of October 2010. Another book published in 2019 with the consent of Edward's sister, which was written by Sarah Hawes by the name of Withdrawn Trace, Searching for the Truth About Ricky Manic. That book claimed evidences that Edwards staged his own disappearance. After reading about Edwards, I opened one of his songs, Stay Beautiful, and started listening to it. And while I was listening to the song, many questions started to rise. What really happened to him? Did Edwards really commit suicide, or was he so fed up by the fame in that industry that he wanted to live a peaceful life somewhere else? Did he really stage his disappearance? And if someone killed him and they forged all those sightings of him, what was the real reason behind his disappearance? As I was thinking all these questions with my eyes closed, I fell asleep without even noticing. Some say he was in a house fire. The flames had gnawed the skin like an old candle. Others swore he was struck by lightning as a child and that the bolt head forked directly into the poor boy's face. The rumors that he looked the way he did because of some horrifying nuclear accident at the nearby Donetsk power plant. Men swore he was real. Others said that it was all a lie. But back in the day, almost everyone in the greater Pittsburgh area had heard some variation of the Charlie No-Face urban legend. Some called them the Green Man, others the Monster of Beaver County, but the details were essentially the same. Some older Pennsylvanian even claimed to have met Charlie No-Face when they were younger, saying it was by far the single most terrifying moment of their lives. They described it like shaking hands with a Jersey Devil or sharing a makeup mirror with a Powder and Bloody Mary. We thought it was impossible. But there it is. Clear as day, really is you and me, because Charlie No Face was real. And the story is just about as terrifying and tragic as a person can imagine. On August 16, 1919, an 8-year-old boy named Ray Robinson was taking a walk with his sister and a few other friends out near New Castle, Pennsylvania. At some point, the children looked up to see a rather fetching bird's nest perched atop a nearby tree. Only, this tree happened to be dangerously close to an abandoned railway bridge. It's thought the children were engaged in an activity known as egging, in which children would cruelly steal birds' eggs in order to preserve paint or display them. But when Ray didn't know what was that just a year earlier, another boy had tried to climb the exact same tree and had managed to touch one of the exposed wires that still had a current running through it. The boy died a slow, painful death over the course of 2 weeks, and Ray was about to make exactly the same near-fatal mistake. A horrifying amount of current ran through his young body, so much those eyes, lips, ears, and nose were all hideously malformed, burned away completely. One of his arms was frazzled and rendered useless by the subsequent fall, while one of his hands was blown clean off of his wrist by the force of the electrical current. He went through an ungodly amount of pain suffering. But with the hard work of some top local doctors, little Ray Robinson miraculously survived. As you can imagine, Ray's life became extremely difficult after the accident, and not sure because of his injuries. Many of the larger Victorian-era homes in rural Pennsylvania, including the one Ray grew up in, really can be something to behold. The extravagant architecture include high ceilings, grand bay windows, and often the privacy of personal in-suite bathroom fixtures. In some cases, the level of domestic self-sufficiency meant that a person could remain in one isolated corner of the house for days, perhaps even weeks on end, as just as much as it could be used to provide a sense of comfortable solitude. Such features made for rather horrible gilded cages for people like Ray, and the South's family kept his monstrous form hidden away from the terrible public mile counts. Ray was kept isolated and shunned even by his own family. But he wasn't entirely mistreated during his upbringing. He was amply fed, and his love of baseball was indulged by parents that provided them with both baseball cards and a wireless radio with which he could listen to games. His parents also understood that he needed to keep busy, and also that they needed to teach him to function in society. They provided him with the means to learn Braille, and even taught him out of fashion wallets indoor mats that have used rubber tires. When he came of age, his family revealed a renovated apartment that made for him, sent into the family garage. It was much closer to them both physically and emotionally, and it meant the world to a young man who had been so terribly misunderstood for most of his young life. Only as he grew, a yearning to roam free burned in him. So in a small act of rebellion, Ray slipped out of the house in the dead of night and walked the highway near the family home. It became something of a habit. He enjoyed the feeling of the tarmac underfoot, the feeling of the breeze on the skin. After a while, he went from walking the highways once or twice a week to almost every night, always alone and always at night. And this is where the real-life Ray Robinson became a walking, talking urban legend. Most nights, on the rare occasion that a car did come along, Ray was so frightened by the sound of the oncoming engine that it scampered off the road and hid among the foliage. But after a while, he found he was unafraid of the roaring vehicles if he stuck to the side of the road. That didn't seem to bother him, so he made the decision to stop hiding. One day, Ray was walking along the highway when once again he heard the sound of an oncoming car. It unlike so many times before, and the vehicle had just rolled on by having not caught him in its headlights. Ray, or the screech of tires on the road behind him. A man cried out into the night, revving his engine the way that sounded a lot like reversing Ray Spooked, bolted off the road and into the cover of some trees. Ray swore off his nightly walks for a while, but the damage was done, and in nearby Elwood City, rumors began to spread that the man with no face. The first sighting didn't cause too much of a stir. People just thought the storyteller was tired, crazy, or drunk. But after a few months, a second sighting of an obviously restless Ray Robinson caused something of a frenzy among the local townsfolk. People would scour the length of the Route 351 once the sun had set, desperate to confirm the rumors of Charlie No-Face for themselves. But one by one, the people of Elwood found the rumors were all true. As one might expect, Ray's rather unusual appearances was the subject of equal parts fascination and revulsion. But for the most part, those that encountered him were not without compassion. People would begin to offer him cigarettes or beer to amenities he had never had the fortune or misfortune to partake in, and like many of us, he found that he enjoyed them. It also seems that he was partial to having his picture taken, and as there are many confirmed photographs of Ray with smiling local arms around his shoulder, as if he was a beloved celebrity. Again, rumors spread that Charlie No-Face likes beers and smokes, and the town folks would bring tributes to Ray on a nearly nightly basis. And this only further incentivized his nightly rambles down Route 351. But not everyone who sought him out had good intentions. According to some Elwood residents, Ray was attacked and beaten up on more than one occasion. One person even tells the story of how one particular cruel character filled a bottle of beer up with his own urine, shielded it, then gave it to the blind wanderer on one of his Moonlight Jonesy. Some would stop him, not for to give him a ride, then simply drive in the middle of nowhere and kick them out the car. Shocking, but not surprising, as anyone even remotely familiar with humanity might be quick to remind you. When older Elmwood residents tells the story of driving down Wallace Run Road late at night with his friends, they brought with them a case of beer, a straw, and some cigarettes, and their usual tribute to the Green Man. Although his friends had seen Charlie No-Face before, our narrator had yet to have the pleasure. And when Ray Robinson finally presented themselves in the flesh right in the seat next to him, the man said he was frozen in terror. Everything they said about him was true, and his face really was green. And as it turns out, there's a rather grim reason behind the discoloration, as Ray's nose was basically an open wound for his entire adult life, and as a result, he often suffered from quite dangerous infections, thus turning his face a slightly verdant woo. People need to understand, the resident was quoted as saying this was a human being, a real person, and someone who endured one of the most tragic lives I've ever encountered. Underneath it all was this beautiful, kind man. Somewhere, there exists a photograph of Ray Robinson posing with a woman. It's clear that she's happy that she's unafraid of him, and the way she holds him speaks to the warmth that she has for a man she may never ever have met before. All based on a well-deserved reputation of being a kind and gentle spirit that wouldn't let her life-changing accident keep them down. There's also an interview with a man whose brother was killed in action during the Vietnam War. By his own admission, his fascination with Charlie No-Face was a rather eccentric one, but he also credits Ray Robinson with helping through the darkest periods of grief he'd suffered so far. Ray wasn't just an urban legend, he was a real flesh and blood man, and a good one at that. Ray was living in an assisted living facility when he passed away in 1981, as grave as in the Grandview Cemetery located in 139 Norwood Drive in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. And coincidentally, it's just a few plots away from the little boy electrocuted in the exact same manner, just a year before his own accident. Occasionally, someone comes along to put fresh flowers down in Ray's grave. It's not clear whether this is one person or many, but the message is clear. Ray's legacy lives on, but it's in the terrifying tales the man with no face on love that those who came to know him show. So here's the Ray Robinson, the urban legend who turned out to be very, very real, and who deserves the rest in the deepest and most heavenly peace.